Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 154th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today, our panel will discuss Project 1619. Project 1619 is a collection of essays and articles put forth by the New York Times commemorating the landing and Port Comfort, Virginia, of the first Africans sold into slavery in what became the United States of America. The goal of the project is to reframe American history by considering what it would mean to regard 1619 as our nation's birth year. Doing so would require us to place the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the story we tell ourselves about who we are as a country. Our panel, beginning on my left, is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Tom Finley, co-founder of the Great Lakes Resource Center. On his left is Patty Haskins, member of the Wadsworth City Council, and on her left is Joe Gaines, faculty member of the University of Akron. Ron, when you consider the goals of Project 1619, as stated, in fact, I'm going to state that again, just for our listeners. The goal of the project is to reframe American history by considering what it would mean to regard 1619 as our nation's birth year. Doing so would require us to place the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black America at the very center of the story we tell ourselves about who we are as a country.
John, it's really a very monumental work. It runs to some 100 pages as a PDF file, a portable document format file. And as a disclaimer, I certainly haven't read the whole thing. I really wasn't able to get to do it until Tuesday about 10 o'clock in the evening, and then spent some time on it yesterday. But I skimmed through and read a couple of the essays and articles, and I found it disturbing, although I think I probably, in my background, in my thinking, in my experience, realized that I've known all this stuff somewhat, you know.
That was my thought too.
Yeah, so I think it would be well for you possibly to put the link to this thing on a website, civilitymatters.org. So people can do it. I think it's going to be difficult. I'm reading it on my home computer, and it's small print there. I think if you only access the internet as your phone, you're probably not going to want to read it.
Yeah.
It just really.
Well, there's too much advertising thrown in.
A lot of advertising.
Yeah.
Well, you got to pay for it somehow. So.
Yeah.
So, I think maybe if this gets taken to heart, it could have some effect. However, I must say that as I age, I am subject to a certain amount of senescent cynicism. I think I'm not sure it's going to do much good. In a way, it's preaching to the choir. It's preaching to people like me that have some, if not experience, at least some intellectual agreement with it. I think that people have a very difficult time getting rid of entrenched beliefs that come from early on in their development. The song from South Pacific, "You've Got to Be Carefully Taught," is oversimplification, but certainly there's something to that. In my own case, I grew up in a house in a small Pennsylvania town that maybe had one or two African American families. Been there for many, many years. City of Altoona had more, but that was some distance away when you're a kid. I grew up Catholic in a primarily Protestant family. All my cousins were not Catholic, and most of the playmates in the neighborhood were not. So I kind of developed through my parents' attitudes and teachings a tolerance for people who weren't me.
Mm-hmm.
And some folks never got that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But what do you think would happen if the United States Congress decided to declare, what would it be, August 20th, 1619 as the official founding and sort of abandon the 4th of July as the founding moment of the country?
well, I don't think you have to abandon the 4th of July, frankly, because this is a momentous thing in the organization of the government of our country.
So you would think that we would do both?
I think you do both. I think you could do both. I'd like to continue on something about this article, and something that I think is important to know going in as you begin to read it. This is from the introduction to the article. It says here, a word of warning: there is gruesome material in these pages, material that readers will find disturbing. That is, unfortunately, as it must be. American history cannot be told truthfully without a clear vision of how inhuman and immoral the treatment of Black Americans has been. By acknowledging this shameful history, by trying hard to understand its powerful influence on the present, perhaps we can prepare ourselves for a more just future. That is the hope of this project. What is the hope? As I say, well, I mean, we all heard the New York Times is fake news, so who's going to believe that, you know?
Well, obviously not you.
Obviously not me. Because again, I read one article I read was from a defense attorney. It's toward the end of the volume. Defense attorney who is working to get young Black men out of prison in their appeals. He says he speaks of a prison in Angola, which I think is in Mississippi, one of the worst in the country, predominantly African American and people of color. There are kids there who are caught up in the 3 strikes rule who are serving life in prison with no opportunity for parole for stealing a bicycle. African American kids. So
You got to remember, the 3 strikes rule was put into
Bill
effect
Clinton.
by the first Black American president.
Yeah, well,
according to,
it was earlier than that, I think, was it not?
pardon me?
It was earlier than that, was it
97.
not? Oh, okay. So, yeah, it was, and that's another unintended consequence thing. You know, it was intended to get the drug dealers off the street, but
That was intended to get votes.
yeah. So anyway, that's my take. I think it has a possibility, but I really don't think it's going to have much effect.
Tom, have you mulled this around much?
Yes.
Tell me what you think.
Yeah, well, I question the motivation of the New York Times right away with the article and cherry-picking history to shape their point of view.
Yeah.
And so I resent it very much. I think the use of reframing is an exaggeration. It was, to me, a blatant use of journalism in a negative way. So I start off with that. It ignored the history, the fact that we weren't even a country, that the world cultures at that time were slavery up until about 50 years ago, as a matter of fact, before
Well, it
the
still
Mediterranean. And it still exists if you look at slavery in its broad terms. You've got a question about how women are dealt with in the world. So you can go on with this, but it ignored the major factor that we weren't a country. We were part of England, of course, and in that culture. It ignores that slavery was well established in the Western Hemisphere by the 1500s. In fact, the Sea Lion stole those slaves from a ship delivering them to Mexico. So none of that is relevant. And what was the Civil War fought over? It was distorted with the slavery issue, but were states allowed to leave the Union? That's what the Civil War was started with. That's why we had the Civil War. But it quickly escalated around the slavery issue, the emotions of that. So I think this can only serve negatively. It can back things up in terms of the movement to make people considered equal.
Patty, I know this was a lengthy thing. There were some 18 different articles and essays involved in. I didn't expect everybody was going to read the whole thing, because I didn't either. I skimmed, I think, all the articles, but didn't really read them. What's your take on it?
I found it intriguing. I thought that this was a very timely piece. I thought it dealt with a great deal of research. I didn't see the negative aspect of it. I think, and it said this early on, that one of their hopes was to show that the growth in this country and things that have happened as far as civil rights, as far as gender rights, as LGBTQ rights are concerned, were promoted by the struggle that Black Americans have had throughout this country and the way they have come forward to express those rights. I think that it brings back the fact that we don't need to cover up some of the atrocities that have occurred within this country, and there have been many. They talked about the Tuskegee experiments that were done, the lynchings that have gone on, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, the prevention of people being able to vote, the way that people had to fight to get that voting right, the way they had, to fight just to be free men. All of this needs to be brought out and needs to be remembered. And it's not something that we should wash under the carpet because it's kind of an ugly side of our history.
Do you think that there's ever been a movement to do that,
Oh, yes.
to ignore it all?
I think there are people that want to ignore it, and when it's brought up, it's in the past and it's over and it didn't happen to you. And
But when I think about all the books and movies and TV documentaries and I have known about, there were, like Ron, there was nothing new for me. Well, there were a couple of things new.
And a great deal of it I knew already, but the fact that you ignore it or say that you can't discuss it, and that happens quite a bit, that we in that way reshape history. I don't like the comment about reframing history, and I don't think we need to do that, but I think we do need to remember, because history only provides us a way by which to correct our mistakes of the past. I mean, there are many important things that are being done from this standpoint. And there are things that we learn now that have been covered up for years. The movie Hidden Figures that came out a few years ago. Absolutely love that movie. If you haven't seen it, you really should watch that. But the fact that so much of our space program a great deal of it was by Black females who were never even mentioned. I mean, to the point that when Katherine Johnson would first sign the report, she wasn't even allowed to put her name on the report because, number one, she was a female and she was African American, and computers weren't allowed
And
to
that
do
was
anything.
in the 60s.
And that was in the early 60s. But it didn't come out until the book was written about it. I had never heard of it. I had heard of it before the movie came out and was aware of that, but those are the types of things which people deny exist. People think that the KKK doesn't exist. They still exist. And there is still a great deal of hatred out there. And when you allow this to be forgotten, and when you say it's over, it only allows for those that are zealots and those that have bad intentions a way to come back in and start forming again.
Are people really saying that it's over and forget about it?
Oh, yes, I hear that.
Do you really?
Everything's fine, isn't it?
Everything's fine. Racism is over.
Yeah.
It's been corrected.
Boy, you guys
They've
have
got what they
strange
want.
friends.
No, well, I don't mean to interrupt here, but
Go right ahead.
there was a TV show on in about 1968, around late 60s, maybe early 70s, by the name of Black History, Lost, Stolen, and Strayed. And sadly to say, the narrator was Bill Cosby. But it was excellent. I mean, I'm a history student, always have been since I was a kid. And I wanted to know more about Black history. And I didn't know anything about it. I mean, from what I studied in high
Really?
school, from what I studied, up until college. Until college, I took a course in Black history, and that's where I learned what I know now.
You never heard about Emmett Till and the,
Not really.
really?
Yeah.
No,
Eli
that
Whitney?
wasn't part of the curriculum in a white
No.
school.
Eli Whitney?
Who?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't hear it.
He invented the cotton gin, Eli Whitney.
Yeah, right.
Is he black?
Black.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that. I really didn't know
Tom,
that.
you just made that up.
Okay, we can look at other scientists.
But my
I had
point
no
is
idea.
that in that TV series, they brought out all this information that was extremely important about African Americans that we never knew. The invention of the stoplight was African American. All the important doctors, important doctors, all kinds of information. I feel that we don't want, it's almost like, it's easy to say everything's okay. I don't know what their problem is.
So you think this project is pretty important?
Excuse me.
No. Can I
use-
finish, please?
I'm sorry, Joe. This was germane to what my interruption is. I invented Eli Whitney as a black man. The significance of Eli Whitney was to change the whole economic picture around blacks. So
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Well,
We
that,
did.
that needs to be elaborated on
Well,
just a little bit. The
but-
cotton gin was thought to end slavery at the beginning because,
We
this
would need
machine
it,
was
yeah.
going to do, all they do was lower the price of cotton, increase the demand,
But see,
and then increase the demand for
we look
more
at Black
field-
American history as basically economics, music, and different in athletics. It's a lot more than that. There's a great deal more than that, and we don't realize that. I think we want to kind of close our eyes to what the past is, and not realize. The comment about the Civil War was right. The Civil War wasn't about slavery. It was about, the separation of states.
Well, actually, it was about whether or not the new states in the
Right.
in the West were going to be admitted as slave or
Right.
non-slave states. That was because.
But
the,
Lincoln brought in slavery because, with everything with the Quakers and got more people interested and involved and so on.
the abolitionists.
And it made it an issue, an abolitionist.
Yeah.
But it's that whole thing like, Black Lives Matter. Of course they do.
Yeah.
And why would that become all of a sudden a topic where why would they say that?
Human lives matter.
Right.
One of the things that I want to get off of my chest, I guess, when I think about Black history, I think about music and sports. And in fact, I just finished a book called Black and Blue, and it was about the 1974, I think it was, the World Series between the Dodgers and the Orioles. But there was a lot about Frank Robinson, who had just been traded to the Orioles. And every time you read about one of the older black athletes, you hear these horror stories about how they were treated in different towns and could never stay with the team, always had to stay someplace else.
Sure.
There were, in the black community, there was a certain book. They had put together a book about
Yeah.
There's a movie made
Yeah.
about it, yes.
Kind of a directory of where they could stay safe.
yeah, right.
And eat and so on.
That and the horrible treatment as recently as World War II. Truman was given credit for integrating the armed forces. I don't know exactly what he did, but the stories about heroic Negro soldiers that were denied medals, that were mistreated when they came home from the
Sure.
war.
Well, there was one article about that in the project.
He was
too.
blinded.
Yeah,
He was blinded after he got off the bus.
yeah.
The Tuskegee Airmen never got really credit until just in recent years.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
Right.
They're all dead
No,
almost.
but those are some of the things that really bother me. But here's a question. Do we place any value on racial reconciliation? And if so, does this help or does it hurt?
I don't know if it helps, but I will tell you that we've got to really look and see how they've achieved, what they've achieved, and how they fought, African Americans,
Yes.
to get to where where they're at now. I mean, it's amazing when you think about it.
And I would hate to think that the only way to have reconciliation is by saying to Black Americans that, okay, we'll reconcile and we won't do this anymore, but you forget about anything that happened
Right.
in the past. It's all,
But-
you know. And that's the wrong way to go about it. It has
Right.
to be remembered so as not to make the same mistakes again.
Well, I would add to this, isn't it a beautiful example of the Constitution in action, in the strength of that document? Because it was the framework around which all the movement could take place, and
Well, I think there's a lot of
ultimately.
truth to what he said, what you're
Right.
saying, yes.
So, why wouldn't you, when we were looking at this kind of thing, frame that to give this country and that Constitution credit for that?
Yeah, but that Constitution had to be, I mean, they had to
Had
fight
to
to,
be
to make
amend-
that work.
Yeah,
Well,
and that
but
was- yeah,
if
that-
that Constitution hadn't existed,
Right, I agree.
That's
they
true.
wouldn't
Right.
have
I
had
agree.
the whole base.
Right.
That's true.
That's
and,
the
But it
and
was-
I don't think the purpose is to, to run down the Constitution.
Well, it
or-
sure sounds like it.
Well,
It does,
did-
yes, because it was such an outrageous lie when it was written, that all men are created equal. And nobody there believed that for a moment.
No,
I certainly didn't believe women were created equal.
no.
But
that
like
took
Tom
longer.
said, though, it formed the foundation for the corrections to come.
Right.
And it stood the test of time. Ugly incidents around that whole business, but it still has
It was during
stood.
an enlightened period, too, which we haven't seen in a long time.
But the only
Good
way to
point,
make
Joe.
sure that it
Good
is
point.
changed is to bring out those issues and to correct them
Right.
because they were wrong. If they're never mentioned, the Constitution stays in that original format, which would have still had blacks counted as 3/5 of a person and women not voting. So,
We've talked about examples of things that people think and feel and deny and support and all of that, but Project 1619, where does it get us really if we were to reframe the history, to honor the date? I've always had trouble with honoring dates to begin with, but to honor the date that the ship landed in Port
I don't
Comfort.
want to honor it, I want to know about it.
You know,
Yeah.
this,
Yeah, that's news to
I
me.
would agree with that.
in many ways, this article, I'm sorry I'm so down on it. I really think I'm not upset by it, but it's taking, what if Washington's boat had capsized and he was drowned in the Delaware? What would be the impact on history? Well, it's kind of in that framework for me. I even doubted the statistic of the net worth of black Americans versus white Americans. Because nothing was said as, is that a trending upward? Is it getting worse, better, or whatever? It's just a 17,000 versus 171,000 net worth of families, the difference. So you can go on, but at any rate, I think this kind of reporting serves no value.
I
I
can't.
find it intriguing, I find it interesting, and I don't,
Well, I feel that sometimes if I read something that I find negative, I think it's justified that they wrote it because it makes me feel negative. I want to argue. I want to see a different point of view.
That's good, Joe.
No, I do. I
It
want to
is.
see a
That's
different
right.
point of view.
That's
It's
right.
not that I have to accept. I don't want to, everything that's written isn't propaganda. Like, oh yes, that's good. That's good. That's good. Oh, that shouldn't be written because it's bad. No, it should be written because it is something I disagree with and makes me think.
right.
Okay, well, I want to make you think for just a moment. Back to racial reconciliation for a moment. It's hard to find definitions of it. I could find one that was repeated over and over again, and it's largely based on Christianity. But there aren't that many definitions of racial reconciliation. One definition, in obedience to God, racial reconciliation is a commitment to building a cross-cultural relationship of forgiveness, repentance, love, and hope that results with walking in beauty with one another and God. Can you argue with that?
It's poetic,
Can you understand it?
which is its own truth.
I'm sorry, you don't understand it?
No, I
Yeah.
understand it, but it's a little,
Well-
it's so poetic, I think
Well, what about, for me, the two key words are forgiveness and repentance.
And I think it's got to put weight on both the white and the black for reconciliation.
That's, that's what I'm reading
That's a
into
good
this, is that the forgiveness is on
Yeah.
the part of the blacks and the repentance on the part of the whites. How would you
That's
How would
almost
you
a
do that?
racial.
How would you do that? Only on an individual one-to-one basis, I think. That's all. That's really. You have to make friends. And I don't see how you can set up a society-wide program to do that. I really don't.
As long as you've got one side that wants to constantly point out the misgivings, or the sins of the other. I just have a terrible time with where we are. We toss the word racism around so
But,
casually.
I'm concerned you say,
Well-
I don't want people to forget the sins of the other. You're saying, you need to forgive them.
That's the definition I asked you about. I didn't
Yeah.
tell you it
Yeah,
was mine.
yeah.
Well,
No.
in some
Turn
ways,
the other cheek, Cam?
racial reconciliation is an oxymoron. I mean,
I have to think about that.
yeah,
for a
well,
minute.
think about reconciliation is something that takes place right here.
And it assumes that you were ever reconciled to begin with.
It does. That's what I'm saying. It's an oxymoron.
Yeah.
Military intelligence, you can go on.
Oh,
Well, that's the one, yeah, that's
That's definitely a
But it's the same category.
That's it. Jumbo shrimp.
jumbo shrimp.